Hello and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Mike, and I've spent the last 2 years reading books from across time and space in a Read Around the World project that is still continuing but starting to come toward its end. And so I've been thinking a lot about how is this channel going to metamorphose into the future. I don't necessarily want it to be an abrupt transition, and so I thought now that it's decided, this is as good a time as any to announce the author that I have chosen to read their entire works that are available, and not only read them, but learn the original language in which they are written and read them in the original. And there is no timeline for this. I don't know in what form I'm going to be making videos about this, just that it's going to be a huge part of my reading in the future, and so it'll be very natural that I mention it often, or and I do think the pace of videos is going to slow down at some point in the near future here, but this is going to be a big part of my reading moving forward, and so let's discuss it. Who is this author? Looking at my favorite books from reading over 150 books over the last 2 years from over 120 countries, I've asked myself, what is the purpose of this sort of superficial, well, I don't know if I want to say superficial, but surface level collecting, and overturn a stone here, check it out, that's great, put it back, and say, well, I'm trying to find the rabbit holes that I really feel are worth going down, aren't I? And there's that combined with this idea I've had in my head to read the entire works by a beloved author at some point. I looked at my list of favorites, and even when I first read the Metamorphoses by Ovidius Publius Nasonis, better known as Ovid, I called it the greatest thing I had ever read, and I would still choose that as my favorite book if pressed to it. And looking at just the list of my favorite books, there's really no other author that has such a collection of works. We have 9 works available from this 2,000 and more year old author. Who's been deceased for more than 2,000 years, and that's just incredible. And it's funny to me because I've heard people recently say that, and even in this Cambridge Companion to Ovid, these mentions of that Ovid has been kind of declining in popularity or something. But I'm like, I find that such a preposterous statement, because I am living proof. For even one person to be reading or caring about something you did 2,000 years later is pretty much an achievement in its own right. I would be a nut job as an author or writer to ask for more than that. So anyway, I really resonated with the Metamorphoses, and I look forward to reading the entirety of Ovid's bibliography that's available in both English and Latin. How am I going to do this? This video is going to consist of a few parts. I've kind of explained already why Ovid, and I'm going to talk about the works of Ovid that I'm going to be reading and in what editions. I'm going to talk about the supplemental resources that I'll also be reading alongside the works themselves, kind of as just to understand the world and the life of Ovid and the context and how people view his works. I'm trying to take a pretty comprehensive approach to this, and then also talk about at the end how I'm going about learning Latin and some things to do with that. So that's what I'll be covering, and let's just start. Basically, I have collected, I actually still have one on the way, but I've got the majority, and that's the last one that I'll be reading, so it won't hold me up. But I have all of Ovid's works here collected in the Loeb, the LOEB Classical Library editions, Sans Uno, that I'm still waiting for in the mail. But I'm going to be starting with Now, the important thing about these editions, if you don't know, they are bilingual. So they have the English on one side and the Latin on the other. So really an amazing edition if you want to read it in the original language. These may not be the best translations, and I may find myself wanting to supplement these with some alternate translations from my local library and so on. But I think if you are interested in reading Ovid in Latin, these are must-haves. So Heroides and Amores, actually in reverse order, I'm going to be reading Amores first, and the descriptions I give of these are going to be very surface level, you know, like what I know about them. Maybe reading them I'll find they're quite different than what I'm expecting, but this is what I've gathered from my initial research so far. Amores is like love poems, love letters, or I think specifically love poems from the little bit that I'd already started to read, and it was the first thing that we have of Ovid that was published, so I'm trying to go as chronological as possible here. Heroides sounds really interesting because it's an epistolary work, so it's entirely letters written by women of Greek mythology to the hero, like the Greek heroes they were in love with. And that is the entire work. And so I really know nothing about it beyond that, but I really look forward to reading it. I have deep trust in that I'm going to love everything, or at least find fascinating everything that Ovid has written from what I know about them. And they're quite, as you'll see as we go through this list, quite diverse. There's quite an extensive range of styles and subject matter and approaches that Ovid takes. No two works are really the same. Now I will say at this time, there is also a tragedy that he wrote called Medea, based on Medea, that we do not have, from my understanding. So that is one work of his that we know existed but do not currently have. Then we have The Art of Love and Other Poems. You know, again, all of these, English on one side, Latin on the other. So, and again, I'll talk about how I'm learning Latin at the end of the video, and am really not finding it that intimidating and finding it fun even already to read these and try to work out different passages, because there's no rush to this, and I feel like every moment I'm spending doing this project already is not wasted. So The Art of Love and Other Poems is his Ars Amatoria, I think is how it's pronounced, and then The Remedies for Love. It's The Art of Love and The Remedies for Love. And so these two works kind of were published together after these first two that I mentioned. They're basically advice books or self-help books about love, from what I can understand. I'm sure that's very simplistic, and I won't quite understand the breadth of what they are until I read them, but they're much more like sort of practical sort of things. And it also, Other Poems is interesting because it has a few works in here that we aren't quite sure if Ovid wrote them. So we have Face Cosmetics. I think that is something he wrote for sure. But then there is The Walnut Tree, Sea Fishing, and A Poem of Consolation. I think all of these are somewhat controversial or were heavily edited in a way that we're not really sure if we're reading the source material or might have been accidentally attributed to Ovid. That's what I understand. But I still plan to read them anyway. And then also in here we have something chronologically out of order, so I will come back to that at the end. So after we read Amores, Heroides, and The Art of Love and Other Poems, we will go to the great Metamorphoses, which is in 2 volumes in this edition. But I also have, just in Latin, from the Oxford Classical Texts, just because I love this edition so much. yeah, I got this Latin edition with it's all in Latin, and so this is more for reading pleasure when I'm finally comfortable enough in Latin to the Latin Metamorphoses to read it without the English side by side. This is going to kind of be my reward, my ultimate triumph of being able to open this to any passage and know what's going on. So that's why I have it. I'm going all out on this, you know, at least from a sense of like having fun with it. And of course I've got my favorite English translation that I've read so far is David Rayburn's Penguin. This is kind of, you can get this in the cheap paperback, and this is the hardcover, which isn't even that much more expensive, but much more durable and nicer to read. So I got this. I have this, of course, at the ready to read it in my favorite translation when I want to. And then I also have the Horace Gregory translation here, which I enjoy bits of as well for comparison. So lots of Metamorphoses. That's 5 books, actually 6, because I actually have this cheap Latin edition for taking notes on different phrases and words, and so I scribble all over this it kind of seems like a student guide. It's Pantheanos Classics. It was really cheap, but this is just the Latin of Ovid, and I use it just for notes. Just the Latin of Metamorphoses. So, okay, so after Metamorphoses, then we will be moving on to Fasti. I really look forward to this one. This is his other epic alongside the Metamorphoses that I think I read somewhere it was unfinished, but allegedly so was the Metamorphoses, and it reads just about as finished as anything I've ever read. So we'll see. But I really look forward to this one because it kind of, from what I understand, poetically describes the festivals of the Roman calendar and the Roman year, and it's supposed to kind of take you through a Roman year through festivals. And I just think that sounds absolutely wonderful and something very different from anything else he wrote. And then, of course, the one volume I don't have here of the Loebs that's on its way is Tristia and Ex Ponto, which are the things that Ovid wrote while he was in exile. And also, and the one I skipped over from The Art of Love and Other Poems is Ibis, or Ibis, which is Ibis, I don't know, IBIS. So that is another one of his works that was written in exile that I will read with those other two, before he passed away. He passed away in exile in what is now modern-day Romania, and so those have a much more autobiographical approach, and I honestly don't know too much about them yet, so but I do know they're quite different from, again, anything else he wrote. So we really do go through many different phases, many different styles in Ovid's career. So that's just his work, and now we're going to talk about supplemental materials before I talk about how I'm learning Latin, besides just, of course, reading Ovid and comparing it to the English translation, because that's never quite enough. Yeah, basically, to have a better appreciation of Ovid, I have read the Iliad already from cover to cover, but the Odyssey has kind of been, and these are both the Lattimore translations, the Odyssey has really been a hurdle to me. I've tried the audiobook in several translations. I've tried the physical book in several translations, and I just don't get into it, and I can't really explain why. I am going to force myself at all costs just this one time to, from start to finish, understand and read and find a way, whatever way I can, to appreciate and love the Odyssey so that I can better appreciate Ovid. Of course, I will not be reading these in the classical Greek. Learning Latin is quite enough. Yeah, these are musts. And of course, the Aeneid by Virgil. Virgil would have been kind of one generation behind before Ovid and was a great influence on Ovid, so that is why it's very important for me to read the Aeneid and Virgil as I'm reading definitely before I get to the Metamorphoses. I'll talk about the reading order. Actually, this is a good time to do it as I'm talking about the supplemental materials. So the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Odyssey and the Aeneid, and reviewing the Iliad are these are priorities. These I have to do I feel, before I get to the Metamorphoses. Also, Edith Hamilton's Mythology, a book that's been with me since, I believe this edition is from when I was in high school. Formative book for me, but it's actually really amusing because Edith Hamilton frequently bashes Ovid, and you can just hear her going, "Ugh, Ovid does this," so many times in the book. And really where this frustration comes from is people who are really interested in understanding like this idea of canonical mythology and canonical history are frustrated with Ovid because we know very well that Ovid messes with the myths. He has all sorts of fun and changes them, and does not respect, in many, arguably has little respect for the true and original approaches that Hesiod and the original myth writers were doing. But I don't share this view, but I do understand that there are those historians and mythological purists out there that are frustrated with Ovid, and I'm just going to remind them that people like Ovid and myself who don't care about your canonical things are always going to exist, and so deal with us. I'm joking, of course, but I do really love Ovid, and I'm doing this mostly for entertainment and enjoyment, in literature purposes, before any sort of historical or academic purpose. It is simply, I get pure delight out of reading Ovid and doing this and learning a language. Now, that would have been a nice segue, but I'm not done with the supplemental materials yet. For biographical stuff, we're looking at Poets in a Landscape by Gilbert Hyatt. I actually just found this at a used bookstore, and it was like, this is perfect. It says, Gilbert Hyatt was a legendary teacher at Columbia University. Poets in a Landscape is his delightful exploration of Latin literature in the Italian landscape, and he tries to recall, in his words, recall some of the greatest Roman poets by describing the places where they lived, recreating their characters, and evoking the essence of their work. The poets he covers are Catullus, Virgil, Propertius, Horace, Tibullus, Ovid, and Juvenal. So like 4 of those, I'm pretty sure, all lived in the same time period that basically connect directly to Ovid. Maybe all of them. I'm not sure. I know at least 4. And so, I just felt like this fell. I'm not getting, like I said, super academic or super in depth with this. You could go down a million rabbit holes, like somebody looking at me doing this project saying, well, to really understand it, you'd have to read, a history of the Roman Empire. You'd have to know this and that, and you'd have to read something else in Latin, and this'll never work. Yes, it will. I learned Spanish and Portuguese, to the little I know of Portuguese, but mostly Spanish in the most chaotic way possible, just by trying to read the books I wanted to read, talking, writing. That's how you learn a language. You just do it. You don't let needing to know like this or that slow you down. And I feel the same way with literature, reading, writing, whatever. So that's just my personal viewpoint on that. Ovid, in lieu of a biography, as I said, this book, and Ovid, a Cambridge companion to him. Cambridge companion to Ovid. So this has essays from like 20 or so different essays from 20 or so different contributors. And they cover, I've read the first 2, which are amazing. The introduction in the first 2, Ovid and early imperial literature. And then Ovid and ancient literary history. So it talks about, you know, the writers that might have influenced Ovid. And then there are essays in here that specifically talk about these specific works that I'm going to read. And so I'm going to read those I've kind of created an order that I'm going to read all of these essays. The first 7 I'm going to read even before beginning Art of Love. And then the other ones I'm going to be reading alongside the specific work that they talk about. And then a few of them I'm saving for the very end. So I'll be reading through all of these essays while I do this project, but I've kind of laid out the order that I'm going to do that. And I don't know, I guess if you're interested in how that order exactly works, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to share that with you, like which essays I'm corresponding to the particular works. So maybe I'll even put that in the description someday if I remember, if I care. So we're going to look at those essays, and that pretty much covers it. How am I learning Latin? That is the next question. So the basically, and this, I remember doing this back when I learned Spanish as well. I looked up a list of the 1,000 most common words. This isn't the only thing I'm doing, but this is a start. If you're trying to learn any language, from what I understand, usually the first 100 words are going to be about 50% of the language. So definitely memorize and learn how to use the 100 most common words. And this works, from what I understand, in a lot of languages. So and if you go up to 1,000 words, then you have about 75 or 80% of the language. But then you get diminishing returns. And at that point, you might as well just be reading stuff and looking up words that you don't know. And that is basically the approach I took with Spanish, and it got me to full fluency with a lot of practice, of course, conversational and things. Of course, you have to practice and do this stuff every day. But I'm also writing, I'm using YouTube. I'm listening to the available stuff by Ovid that is on YouTube and reading along with it. There's a few channels out there that do that. I'm following a couple channels that are just people, talking in Latin, and that's basically the entire basis of the channel. Someday, maybe I'll do a particular video. If this turns out that it works and I feel really passionate about doing it, I might share some of those, but it's not too hard to find if you start digging, honestly. That's just having multiple sort of ways to learn the language is the best way to do it. I find I go chaotic, but I use multiple forms, right? So I have this sort of list of the 1,000 most common words that I'm constantly looking over and practicing with and trying to understand conjugation and stuff. But then I also have this Latin via Ovid, which I probably would have chosen a different sort of workbook if I could go back, but this one kind of works just fine to explain the conjugation and the rules. And while I thought it was going to use like direct stuff, like direct passages from Ovid, but from what I can tell, it's actually just short retellings and summaries of his stories. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. I should have done a little bit more research. And also, the audio of this is basically impossible to find. If you know how to get a hold of the audio of this for a reasonable price or free, please let me know. But it doesn't seem it's possible. And then also the workbook that goes along with it, which really I didn't need. I feel like I shouldn't have gotten that, but this at least kind of has all of the important rules of grammar and stuff broken down in sections and some vocabulary. So I'm also working through this workbook when I have some free time, but kind of my main sources are that core list of 100 words and then a core list of 1,000 words, listening on YouTube and listening to different videos about, like just whenever I can, or doing something else about grammar rules, trying to internalize what I can through osmosis. It's not and like the real core of it is just reading it, because all I really care about, literally all I care about, is reading and understanding it. And I am always practicing reading it out loud as well, because I really want to be able to read, to just read these out loud on YouTube, because I personally would love if right now there were all of Ovid's works. If I wish somebody would just post on YouTube all of Ovid's works, reading them all in Latin for free for everybody. I mean, it's public domain, so you know, it should be done, but unfortunately we only have a few excerpts here and there. And if I'm able to get myself to that fluency, I've thought about even putting myself forward to be the one to do that. So, you know, wish me luck, so all of you can listen to all of Ovid's works in the original Latin. But you know, it's going to be a while, I'm sure, before I feel a certain level of being able to pronounce and speak this stuff out loud. I might even need a tutor. I don't even know if I'm really serious about doing that sort of thing to make sure I'm getting it right. Anyway, that's the Latin stuff, and that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about introducing this project. Yeah, I'm just really excited about it, and it's going to be, you know, again, there's no timeline for it. It is just something that is, as this channel, as I wind down this Read Around the World project, I'm thinking about where I want to take the channel in the future. This project is going to be the guiding light. I would also like to do some more writing of essays and other things, and you know, I'm thinking about a lot of ideas. I've tried some random experiments that to varying effectiveness. So you know, really in the end, this is a YouTube channel, but I'm letting my passion for literature carry me where it will, and both reading and writing, and seeing where that takes us. So thank you if you've watched the entire video, and if you're interested in this project, let me know. If you're interested in doing it yourself or want to know anything else that I may have forgotten, please let me know. With that, take care, and we'll see you next time on Mike Reads the World.